Good afternoon, everyone. So let's get started. Uh, First and foremost, let me extend you a very warm welcome to the SSHRC Inside Grant Session, which is co-sponsored by the Faculty of Education. We have four fabulous panelists. Jennifer Hancock, who's our grant officer extraordinaire at Western Research, and at different points in time, we've had interactions with her. We have Immaculate Namukasa from the Faculty of Education. We also have Cody Grote and Andrew Walsh, who have all been successful inside grant holders, as well as, and some of whom has served in the SSHRC as SSHRC reviewers. So I'm super excited about this particular session. So the way that I'm going to go about kind of hosting this particular session is, first I'm going to tell you, I'm going to introduce the different panelists. They will provide a presentation. Then we're going to go to the next panelist. They will provide a presentation and so forth. And at the very end, we're going to have a Q&A session. So if you could please hold off your questions until we reach the Q&A session, and we've allowed for ample time for that. That'll be fantastic. Okay. Are there any questions up to this point? No. Okay. So I'm going to start by introducing Jennifer Hancock. Jennifer is one out of 6 grant specialists on the Grants Management and Services team in the Office of Research Services. She has conducted compliance review and submission of SSHRC Inside Grant applications since she started at Western in 2015. She has also been the Western Research Communication Leader for this program since 2016. And behind the scenes, Jen is responsible for updating the Western Research SSHRC Inside Grants webpage with important dates and resources, the tracking of Inside Grant applications. They're started in the SSHRC online portal, and for assigning each applicant a supporting grant specialist. And during the fall, she and the other grant specialists support over 650 applications to tri-agency and other external funding competitions. On a more personal note, Jen has really saved me on more than one occasion from myself and helped me submit my grants. I always tell Kelly that I always think of Jen Hancock as an angel without wings. So on that note, I'm going to
thank you.
pass the podium to Jen.
Thank you so much. All right, let me juggle my screens and I'll get on to my slideshow. Actually, I'm going to stop share for a second and move something over. Sorry about that. It's all right, let's try this again. All right, is that happy now? Good, thank you. That's perfect. All right, do a little bit more moving around. And yes, I am going to start, first of all, with a thank you very much for allowing me to attend. And I also want to thank the fellow panelists for joining us, because every year that this session is hosted, I also learn a great deal from those peer reviewers. So their insights, no pun intended, are really excellent. Before launching into the more administrative or process-oriented side of this competition, I'm going to draw to your attention that Western Research, with the help of some generous grantees, have helped to develop a grant repository where anyone with Western credentials can log into the Western financials system. They can choose from the drop-down menu ROLA and Research Financials, And from there, you will see a page with a tile called Grant Repository. And in that repository, you can search for past successful applications by sponsor and by program, and you're going to find lots of Insight Grant applications in there for you to learn from. I'm going to note that the main structure of Insight Grants have remained relatively unchanged for the last 10 years that I've been working with them. But do keep in mind that important changes and little nuances do occur every competition year. So there's no substitute for reading the current call and the applicable application instructions in detail while you're looking at some of the older applications in the repository. I think there's been some mailers that have gone around, so you should have seen these dates previously, but SSHRC is going to be hosting their upcoming Insight Grant webinar. There's an English and French one on the same day on August 20th. You have to register in order to participate in that SSHRC hosted event. There's usually lots of room, so but the sooner you register, probably the better. Get it into your calendar. If you're not going to be available that date, SSHRC does not record their sessions, but they do hand out the slide deck afterwards, and I will receive a copy of those and post them on our Western Research Insight program page. So if you can't attend, those new slides will be on there. The current slides on our page are from last year. The SSHRC webinars are really helpful to attend because they go through each section of the application in much more detail than we can do in a session like this. So if you can attend, definitely do so. There's also a period for extended Q&A. They tend to be really, there's a lot of administrative Q&A. There's some really good questions that come up that can be answered during the webinar. But if you have really detailed questions, sort of very specific to your topic, then SSHRC alternatively asks you to reach out to them using their Insight Grant inbox email address and ask your questions that way, because they can't do that during a webinar. The other thing that always comes up during the webinars as well is that if you have any questions about SSHRC subject matter eligibility for your particular project, then they welcome you to take a one-page summary and also use that Insight Grant email address to ask them or to basically vet your proposal before you launch into doing a much more labor-intensive application. So you can get subject matter vetted in advance. Here are the important dates. So just sort of as an overview, Insight grants are not longer term insight development grants, right? The competition is quite different if you're used to applying to the IDG earlier this year. Insight grants provide stable support for longer term research initiatives. And just like anything across the SSHRC mandate, they're encouraging scholars to address complex issues about individuals and societies and to further our understanding. There are our collective understanding. There's two funding streams. There's the stream A and the stream B, and you can see the funding envelopes for those. And there is no one year that can exceed 125,000. In fact, the budget module within the online portal does not allow someone, you'll get an error if you go over 125,000 in 1 year. The programs can run, or your project can run anywhere from 2 to 5 years within the Insight grants. The Western research deadlines are on this sheet here. We are asking that by September 17th, that you're going to submit a roller proposal and that you are going to submit your application through the web-based forms or SSHRC Online no later than 10 a.m. that day. I've got a little asterisk there next to the internal deadline because each faculty research office will set their own or additional internal review deadline. It may very well be before our September 17th date, and it might have different requirements of what they want to review. So do be aware of what your faculties are requesting. The final application should ideally be resubmitted to our office via the portal by September 29th. That's 2 business days before the actual sponsor deadline, and absolutely no later than 10 a.m. on Thursday, October 1st. As of last year, we have slightly changed our guidance or policy on submitting to our office, in that if we receive an incomplete application for the very first time, 2 business days or 48 hours before the sponsored deadline, there is a real risk, or probably an absolute risk, that it's not going to be considered to be moved forward to the sponsor. Results for the competition arrive in late March, and Insight grants always start on April 1st. So that's actually an important date to know if you're outlining timelines within your application. The applications are submitted through the, as I said, SSHRC Online, or also called the web-based forms. And this is not to be confused with the research portal, which is what applicants to the Insight Development Grant competition use. Just to give you a bit of context, actually, for the slide that comes after this one, and it also relates to sound preparation, I'm going to briefly touch on the SSHRC Online portal. So this is a screenshot of the web-based form sign-in page. Application development, team member invitations and acceptances, SSHRC CVs are all developed and submitted through the SSHRC web-based forms. Therefore, applicants, co-applicants, and collaborators all need to be registered with the SSHRC Online system to participate on your application. You invite your team members once you've started up an application, and there's a participants module within the application. You enter the participant's family name, their email, which has to be the same email that they used to create their registration on this system, and their role, co-applicant or collaborator, within your application. And when you press save, that's automatically going to send out an invitation with instructions to your team members. The application was available to be started as of in June, so you can start up this process, play with the system, and get the invitations out to your known partners, or not partners, but team members right now. So this is part of early preparation, so you don't leave some of these perhaps more unfamiliar steps for your team members too close to the deadlines. This is just really the Office of Research Services review and submission flow or sequence. So you're all going to step through this as applicants as we get to those important deadlines. As I say, right now, you can start up an in-progress application. This is the time where you're consulting with peers, you're asking questions of SSHRC, of our office, of your research officers, you're planning for the faculty internal deadlines, and you're reaching out with certain sort of peripheral things like maybe research security if you have questions. Then by September 17th, all the invitations to your team members have to have been out. They have to have been accepted and all of their tasks completed in the system. So there's going to be some indicators within your application at what stage those invitations are at. Please don't take someone off that hasn't responded to an application in order to submit to our office, because then our office cannot do a complete or thorough compliance review. And we only have time to do one review. We can't go back a little bit later and do a full review with a new team on it. What's going to happen, there will be a grants officer that has been assigned, or grants specialist that has been assigned to you. You will have already received an email or outreach from them. When you submit your application in the web-based forms, you're going to flag your grant specialist, and we're also going to see that it's been submitted to us in the portal. We are going to download a full copy of that application, and we're going to offer to return it to you so you can continue polishing and editing as we work towards that final submission deadline. And then, as I say, by September 29th-ish, you're really going to aim to have that application completely final and resubmitted to us so we can do our final check, make sure everything is there. If we see a critical issue, we are by all means going to reach back out to you. So do be on standby once you've resubmitted it. Don't submit it and then go shopping. Be waiting for some sort of feedback from us that everything is good. If it is, we're going to set a date and time at which we are going to forward the application on your behalf to the sponsor. This action by our office denotes institutional approval when we forward the application. Once it's gone to SSHRC, it's gone, but there's going to be lots of fair warning to you so everybody's on the same page that it's going to be submitted. I'm going to put a warning in here too that the SSHRC online system is a very old and finicky system, and we have seen it completely go down when there's a lot of activity on it. That's why we say put a buffer in there with all of our these dates and timing. Again, all final applications have to be in by 10 a.m. on October 1st. New this year, I've gone through, we've got the webinar coming up from SSHRC, but I've gone through all the call this year and the instructions, and I am not seeing any differences from last year. There were some big changes in 2025, that being the new funding limits in Stream A and Stream B. There had been some restructuring of what the web pages look like, and so a lot of the old links had changed, and so those are all updated on our pages and also within this slideshow. And also there was a new an additional guidance for paying of Indigenous team members. I can give you some background on that, but you can follow the links and learn. Essentially, this whole specific rules for grant funds that's noted on the Insight Grant call page. One of the premise, including this one, an important one, is you can't pay anyone from this grant who's on your research team. So that's your clearly as an applicant, your co-applicant, and your collaborators. And this also has some ripple effects if you're deciding whether you're going to put a postdoc on your team, for example. So you can't put them on your team and pay them at the same time. So all those things are the same as last year. Again, applicable for this coming competition are the main sort of eligibility rules and a couple other things that I've noted on the slide here. So again, anyone who applied successfully to the 2026 Insight Development Grant Competition this past February, if you were successful, you cannot apply this year to Insight grants. If you applied unsuccessfully, absolutely, you can apply to Insight grants this year or to this fall. Keeping in mind again, IDG and IG are different competitions. There's nuances between them, but that maybe is a longer discussion. The Tri-Agency Interdisciplinary Peer Review Committee is now a standing choice when you get to choose which direction or which committee you would like to review your application. This committee, along with the multidisciplinary social science and the multidisciplinary humanities committee options, require you to also add a one-page justification as to why you want to go to this particular panel. So the TAPER panel is for research that spans the mandate of more than one federal research agency. So the main point is that your subject matter for this Insight grant is still firmly rooted in the SSHRC sphere, but there can be significant components that might fall into CHR and or into the NSERC domain. The tri-agency, the applications that go through the Tri-Agency Interdisciplinary Peer Review Committee are actually going to use a slightly different merit review criteria, and we're going to touch on that a little bit in the next slides as well. Also maintained in this competition is the national security guidelines. So we encourage everyone to follow the links listing the sensitive technology research areas. If your projected work is going to work in one of those spheres, that's fine. But if your project is going to advance any one of those listed technology research areas, then you've got some additional steps. You're going to say yes to advancing one of these straws, they're called, and there's going to need to be attestations formed from everyone on the team, rolled up into one PDF and put into your application. If you start looking into this and you have questions, please reach out to our research security team within Western Research, and they can help provide guidance on the meaning, implication, and whether it's going to apply or not to you. Eligibility review. So across all SSHRC competitions, the agency is receiving more health-related proposals. SSHRC has been absolutely rigorous in rejecting ineligible applications from evaluation. So while SSHRC has posted subject matter guidance, including a webpage that's called Selecting the Appropriate Federal Granting Agency, again, we strongly encourage for applicants who have research related to healthcare, health systems, personal health to send the one-page summary to SSHRC Insight Grant mailbox and seek their high-level assessment about subject matter eligibility. Again, you can only submit one and hold one Insight Grant at a time. If you currently hold an Insight Grant, you are allowed to apply for a new one, but only in your last installment year. So the year in which you received your last payment, or if you're in auto extension, the no cost extension, you will still be able to keep your no cost or auto extension year of your current Insight Grant if you are awarded the new Insight Grant. There's no limit to the number of applications on which a researcher can be listed as co-applicant or collaborator, however, so there's more leeway there. You also cannot have an outstanding achievement report from a previous SSHRC grant and receive new funding from an Insight Grant. Submitting an achievement report is really easy through an online portal, and once it's submitted, it's immediately considered received, and you're no longer restricted from holding new SSHRC funds. If you have any questions, if you have or have not submitted an achievement report, you can reach out to SSHRC and ask. SSHRC won't fund the same research project or research-related activity with more than one grant at the same time. However, they do encourage jointly funded research or research-related activities. Basically, what they're saying is that you cannot duplicate your funding request. You can't ask for funding on the Insight Grant if it's already if that same activity or research expense has been funded through another tri-agency grant. There's no intention by SSHRC this coming round to change the eligibility rules for the applicants, co-applicants, and collaborators. Essentially, applicants and co-applicants follow the exact same eligibility criteria. Co-applicants must be affiliated with an eligible Canadian post-secondary institution at the time of application, or for postdocs, 3 months after the grant start date, they have to have that eligible Canadian position, and applicants and co-applicants cannot have a primary affiliation at a non-Canadian post-secondary institution. Collaborators, they don't need to be affiliated with an eligible Canadian post-secondary institution. It's pretty wide open. I guess if you take a look at these roles and the eligibility criteria, from our perspective as administrators, these having the correct role really relates to your budget. So you'll hear more about that during the other webinars, but basically collaborators are very restricted in terms of what kind of funding can go to them. So if you have an international collaborator, they can't be a co-applicant and receive funding for research-related activities. So there's nuances, and you have to understand what the implication of the role that you're assigning will be to your budget. Evaluation criteria. The evaluation criteria are detailed on the SSHRC Insight Grant funding announcement page, so on the main call page. And the biggest encouragement that we can give you is to go back and read and reread each of these criteria and sub-criteria as you're developing your application. So if you're not requesting review by taper, it's going to be the standard evaluation criteria and the weightings that you see on this slide. Both Stream A and Stream B applications are going to go through the same review process, but they are ranked within their stream. And Stream A has a higher targeted success rate than Stream B. There's two groups that are going to be involved in the evaluation of the Insight Grant applications. There's the external assessors, so a minimum of two, and then there's the members of the Insight Grant Merit Review Committee that your application has been assigned to. Merit review committees consider, but are not bound by the judgments of the external assessors. I'm going to again briefly touch on, because I do like talk about budgets, because that's kind of the realm of the grant specialist, something that we spend a fair bit of time on when we look at your application, is that your budget is evaluated under the feasibility criteria. If the application has scored well and it's deemed fundable, then the budget is going to be scrutinized using what SSHRC calls the minimum essential funding lens. So that's sort of how they view it. If the committee judges that the project can be achieved with less money than you requested, the budget will be cut accordingly. And so, some of the areas that we quite often see cut is that if you've asked for a super duper maybe laptop or computer and haven't really justified why you really need that for this research, something like that. Excessive travel costs might be cut, and certainly ineligible costs are going to be cut. And any item, or I guess things like, very large publication costs that they might deem excessive, those sort of things might be cut. Just going to throw this in there. You're going to see this referred to in the call. This is Imagining Canada's Future initiative. And basically, when you're applying to any of the SSHRC open calls, they're encouraging applicants to think about these Imagining Canada Future challenge areas. And you can address one or more of these in your application if it's applicable. It's not an evaluation criteria, and it doesn't offer additional or dedicated research funds. It's really just basically SSHRC putting out some priorities, and if your project happens to align, then it's definitely not a bad thing to reference one or more of these in your application. I've thrown in some statistics. You're going to get the slides and you're going to be able to look at this in a little bit more detail, but some of the things that I just sort of want you to keep in mind. And you're going to see in 2025, there's some blanks there. That's just because we wait till we get the latest SSHRC webinar for those details. So that will be filled in a little later. But the first thing to note is the volume of applications for this competition. The competition itself between applicants is going up. So just over this 3-year period, we see it going from 62 up to 75 we submitted last year. Second, and that's why you'll see a little bracket there under the UWO column in 2025. Secondly, we're seeing more applications rejected for subject matter ineligibility. So we put in 75 and 72 moved on for evaluation. We have heard that this is definitely a national trend, that more health-related ones are trying to go through SSHRC Insight grants. The official competition record that our office receives in late March ranks our applications into sextiles from first all the way down to fifth and sixth. Just for your information, last year, all 16 applications in the first sextile were funded. All 8 in the second sextile were funded, and 4 out of 9 in the third sextile were funded. Last year, 10 of the funded were 5-year projects, 12 were 4-year projects, and 6 were 3-year projects. Only 2 applications received their full budget request, one in Stream A and one happened to be in Stream B. And when I went back to look at those applications out of interest, I noticed that neither one of them requested publication or open access costs. So you can see it was a very, very tight budget. All right, that was tons of detail. There's lots of more resources there, but I hope that gave you a really good basis for the competition and sets up our peer panel with some background information.
Thank you very much, Jen, for that insightful presentation. So I'm going to now move on to Immaculate Namukasa's presentation. But before I do, I am going to give her an introduction of her bio. So Immaculate Namukasa is a professor and associate dean of graduate education and in the Faculty of Education. And as you may have noticed, but I grew up in Panama. I tend to Spanglify all names, so my sincere apologies if I'm butchering your name. Um, and based on her work in education, she was named a teaching fellow by Western University Center for Teaching and Learning. She's also named an emerging leader by the Senior Women Academic Administrators of Canada. And according to the Thames Valley School Board, she has been named an amazing human. As a scholar and once as an international student, she's grateful for the Canadian education context. She has served on more than 20 university and faculty committees, task forces, and advisory boards, and committees in the local community. Uh, Immaculate has also served as a reviewer on national committees, and the efforts of many graduate students have been recognized by internal and external scholarships and awards. She joined Western University in 2004, immediately after receiving her PhD at the University of Alberta. So without further ado, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Choi. Thanks for that introduction, and thank you so much, Jennifer, for setting the stage for the rest of us on the panel. So as I'm going to present, I will also be listening in, and I've already been listening in as I will be planning to apply for a SSHRC IG very soon. So this workshop is also of interest to me as a participant. Now I will focus on the reviewer aspect of my experience than an applicant aspect of my experience. And I'll begin off my review by my presentation by saying much of the information, as Jennifer has let us know, is published on the same website as the application. So the information on merit review plus the details. And she shared with us much about the criteria for assessing proposals, as well as some details of the review process and defining how the process operates and is managed. Now, the reviewers receive much more information than that, and they undergo training and they review all the information for applicants, as well as they receive information and review and sign to the confidentiality of information that is not public facing. So I will share more about aspects of the reviewers as well as the statistics in addition to what has been shared already. So here is the first piece of statistics, and this is available on the SSHRC website, is the overall statistics. It's a dashboard. If you're curious, you can look much further in terms of the trends of applications, where they picked up, where they're lower, as well as where your area of research lies in terms of number of applicants. So I'm from education. I would be interested in seeing where education lies. I mean, from Ontario, I see a majority are from Ontario. And as well as the number of applicants received overall for the SSHRC IDG. Now, for folks who identify as in terms of EDI, there's also places where you can look at EDI. Now, in terms of the scoring table, also available on the same website for applicants, and Jennifer's talked briefly about this. Each application is ranked on merit by the two sets of reviewers, the externals, as well as the committee members. And so it's scored up to 6, and in those ranges. Now, on the right is the criteria, and each line you see on the criteria, kindly read it very closely, because for the reviewers, it translates into something very broad. So if theoretical framework applies to your area, read that line very closely. If it doesn't, read the methodology very closely. And this, as Jennifer said, as you write your proposal, come back and revisit the line and just self-assess how you're being clear and how you're being rigorous, and as well how you're being accurate and coherent in terms of the whole application. Now, this information on this slide is very specific to the scoring itself, and I would like to say I'm very grateful for the support at Western through the research offices and Western Research, because much of what I learned before I reviewed, I learned from the support that we get at Western. I would also like to say that I'm grateful to colleagues who have been very collaborative on grant writing, colleagues at Western, colleagues in education in particular, and colleagues elsewhere. And that's also to say, the more, the merrier when it comes to an application. And more here, you might be a single applicant, but reach out for review by a colleague through the support we get at Western. And you don't only have to reach out to Western, you can reach out across Canada for people in the field and to people who have been colleagues. Some colleagues are extremely successful. They write a grant for the first time and it gets awarded. I'm not one of those, but I know how to reach out to those and see if they can look at a section and give me that piece of feedback, and I carry that on to my next grant applications. So in terms of scoring, the team is looked at very closely. So if you are a single applicant, they look at you very closely to see if really you are going to contribute to the area that you're proposing to do research in. And if it's the team, they do the same for that area. And I should note, I didn't start my timer. So I should be about halfway. I forgot to do that. So I will appreciate being allotted if I go beyond the 10 minutes allotted. So in terms of scoring, they will look at the team. Is the team going to contribute? Is the team, is there evidence for that? Now, they also look at the highly qualified trainees, our professionals, and they want to tell if they are given multiple opportunities. You might be a single applicant, but are there multiple opportunities for students? And do you define in the team what they are going to do? And is the work they're going to do work that they should be doing at that time when the funding is awarded, not work that would have been done previously by the applicants or applicant before the project is awarded. So they look at that closely, or the reviewers, we look at that closely. Proposal leaves no unanswered questions. That is looked at very closely, leaves no doubt, has no shortcomings. There are no concerns that are noticeable, and there are no gaps. And I think that's where a strong proposal emerges. No question is left to be imagined by the reviewers. Every aspect has been responded to, including ethics. Everyone would know that research involving humans goes through ethics, but for some reason you have to mention that somewhere, and it's ethical aspects, even if it's by a few sentences, no, not a few sentences, a few words. So no question unanswered, that you have utilized the support at your university, that the grant you've written matches your level in your career stage. If you're a beginner, early career stage, if your field is different, is a smaller field or larger field, they check for that. That the effort you've taken is visible. Now, I've looked at proposals of my colleagues and elsewhere, and their effort is visible. In terms of not only content, but also beyond, in terms of the form, it's easy to read generally, and easy to remember what folks would have read and seen aspects of it. Now that the external assessors you chose evaluated you in line with Canadian evaluation processes. Not all evaluation processes are similar. If you choose someone from Australia, England, or wherever you choose them from, make sure that you know they are internationally informed, that in Canada, assessment, I think it's more, I'm going to say more, still critical, but critical friendly. Elsewhere, that might not be the case. And so when your assessment come back to the reviewers, if it looks like the assessors tore your applications to pieces, it might be hard for them to be able to see that it's going to be able to contribute. Now, they also look at no challenges, especially with the budget. While we have three criteria, the budget is also a standalone criteria. So another aspect that is looked at, especially if they have to cut it beyond a certain percentage, which I think is over 35, that proposal is not going to be funded. Like your budget has to be really closely looked at and justifiable, that the cuts for it to be funded are not enormous. Overall, target a very good to excellent proposal in all aspects and utilize the feedback you can get, including through Western resources that have been assembled recently. I've spoken about criteria. Now, if you want to see what was on the committee previously, this is published. And if one of them is your colleagues, I think you're allowed to reach out to them for a conversation. And every aspect focus on being original, significant, and appropriate. That you show opportunities for students and others to contribute, and that if people expect you to contribute, that you show that you will contribute to the field, that the quality, potential, and expertise and quantity are all evident, and that you have fully justifiable and it's probable that what you have proposed will be carried out, given everything, including what the team looks like. If there's expertise you're lacking on the team, if you're proposing something in AI, which is more proposals I find from my experience, you have to show that there is someone on that team that has expertise in the different capacities, even if as a collaborator or as students already you're working with. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I'll be happy to respond to questions later on when that time comes on. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that insightful comment. And you're right around at 10 minutes. So you definitely did not go over. The next presenter is Cody Grote, who's an assistant professor in the Department of History and Indigenous Studies and in the Faculty of Social Science. He's also the chair of the graduate program of the History Department. He has served also as a reviewer on the SSHRC Inside Grant Committee between 2025 and 2026, and he currently holds a SSHRC IDG.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much, Kate, for that introduction. I'm going to as well try to keep my comments fairly short without repeating what others have said, because so far it's been quite reflective of my experience. For the most part, I'm just going to comment today as somebody who reviewed Insight grant applications from this past year and to offer some thoughts that I noticed as a reviewer in relation to being a past applicant for an Insight development grant. So my main remarks, it's been said before, but I really am going to articulate it very clearly, is budget justification. Budget justification really is where we were told to most critically evaluate the proposal. Now, for example, I saw a number of cases where I believe people were trying to include budget lines to increase the total amount of funds that were being rewarded when those items weren't necessarily very clearly proven as necessary. I'll give a good example. So many proposals I saw this past year mention how they're going to have a dedicated website for their research project. And they had, for instance, web hosting and some of the resources necessary for developing that website. But in mostly all of those cases, there wasn't really a clear justification as to why a dedicated website was necessary. Now, I don't know if that's overwhelmingly something that people are moving towards for their projects, but it was just a really simple example of where budget justification is really relevant. Also, speaking as a historian, we do have a habit of being very insular in our research in that, we are going to do this self-directed research. We are going to publish these sole-authored monographs and these sole-authored works. But a lot of time what I heard from fellow historians who are on the evaluation committees is that benefiting more people, helping more people, spreading the wealth, so to speak, was actually really highly regarded. And that could be in the form of research assistants who are contributing to your project. Now, we know that institutionally, different universities have different budget amounts that are allocated for what you should pay or could pay a research assistant. We did greatly appreciate when applicants wrote that. For instance, you might say Western University's Faculty of Social Science indicates this is the appropriate amount for hiring a research assistant, or this is the relevant window to really show us not just you're allocating, say, $20,000 for research assistants. How have you come to that number? So specificity and justification when it comes to the budget are very important. Another thing that stood out to us, sorry, just to go back to budget really quickly, and I know this was mentioned by two others as well, but when it comes to us reviewing applications, we are allowed to recommend both itemized budget reductions. So, for example, we could just say as reviewers, we will support funding this, but we're going to take out the budget line entirely for the website, for instance, because we didn't think it was justified. Or we could say overall, we think that this is a project we can support, but we think we can take 10 or 15% universally off of the money that they are requesting. So when you get your response back, you might see either itemized or a universal reduction. When it comes to feasibility, we obviously want to show our ambition for what the projects that we're presenting, but we are going to look. For example, reviewing an application this year, there was a proposal we read that would result in 5 years in 3 sole authored monographs. Now we understand that different people, sorry, have different levels of productivity, but that feasibility was questioned a fair bit. And feasibility is obviously weighted. So both the external reviewers and the 2 committee members who were reviewing that application really did question the feasibility and looked back at that person's past publication record, and that did have a negative impact. So there is that conversation about weighing what you hope to accomplish, what you think you can accomplish, of what reviewers might think is feasible. One of the things as well that we commented on repeatedly is past experience. So for some of us, we might view applying for an Insight grant as transitioning to a new major project, which is fine, but it can't be sort of a radical divergence from what you're doing. There's always value in articulating how this is a natural progression from your research program already. Not a repetition, but a natural progression. I know Western has some really great bridging grants that you can use for, say, one article to get that published, to get that research out in the world. And I would really advise doing that or articulating how you've done that when applying for an Insight grant. I feel like I say this a lot to graduate students and to undergraduate students. Don't leave any sections of the application blank. We saw that a fair bit. Also, don't just regurgitate the same information. Slightly amend it if you can. I will say I reviewed, I think, 50 applications as part of my workload for the committee. There was at least 3 of those where there was just an individual answer that said, go back and do this later. Like somebody made that note and never changed it. And please don't do that. Finally, it was mentioned by Jennifer that there are 3 weighted aspects of an application: challenge, capability, feasibility. And just from the practicality perspective, when we are reviewing the applications, we will give a number weight to those, say 4 out of 6 or 3 out of 6, etc. That automatically turns into a percentage, a weighted percentage, and that weighted percentage then goes on a spreadsheet. So, and when we're making our final funding decisions, we look at those raw numbers. So really take the time to look at how you're answering challenge, capability, feasibility. Don't just think you have a really strong challenge section, so you don't necessarily have to engage in the feasibility section, because if you were to get a failing grade in one of those, it can quite drastically impact your overall score and your chance of being funded or not. So with that, I'm going to stop my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cody, for those insightful comments. Now I'm going to move on to Andrew. I'm going to first provide his bio, and then he will provide his wonderful comments. So Andrew Walsh is professor and undergraduate chair in the Department of Anthropology. His work involves collaborative research and teaching in Madagascar's northernmost province of Antsirabe. Rena,
Antirannano.
thank you very much. And
Okay.
recent topics of research include artisanal mining, ecotourism, small-scale NGOs, humanitarianism, and community-based conservation. Much of this work has involved ongoing work with colleagues and students at the University of Antsiranana. And from 2026 to 2031, Dr. Walsh will be leading an international collaborative research project concerning conventional awareness raising and its alternatives in northern Madagascar, focusing especially on awareness raising around climate change and HIV/AIDS. And with that, I turn the floor to Professor Walsh.
Thanks very much, Kate. And I'll keep my comments quick too, just to so we have time for questions. So I can say something as someone who's applied for grants in the past, but and also served on a review committee. And I think the Cody's advice to find a colleague who's been on a review committee, specifically your review committee, is a really good idea. Because the I think the key thing to understand about the review process, whatever the guidelines on SSHRC's website say, you are being evaluated by your colleagues, and you know what that means better than anyone. And so, back to one of Immaculate's suggestions, I think the more you can get feedback from your colleagues in your discipline, in the areas you work in, the better off you'll be, especially obviously on the parts of the application that address the challenge or the detailed description of the project. My second thing I was going to mention is others have mentioned it, but I'll just second or third it is make use of the resources and support that both the faculty, I assume it's the same with the Faculty of Education, but certainly in social science, working with Kelly and others has been really amazing. And also Research Western they have so much to offer and they do make such an important contribution, especially towards the end of the project when you're getting close to submission. I'm sure we drive them crazy, but their work is really fantastic. One suggestion to help with that is to treat those deadlines that they give you, even though the October 1st deadline is the sort of the SSHRC deadline, treat the deadlines they give you as hard deadlines. Knowing that, of course, a little later on they can release it and you can make your changes. And I think even in their emails to you, they will assure you that even though you're submitting them and it looks like you're submitting it for good, they can release it before October 1st. A third thing, just following up again from Cody, and I'll just take a slightly different angle on it, is don't downplay feasibility. So feasibility is only worth 20%. And you think, well, the challenge and capability, each of those are worth 40%. So you might want to focus more on those. Fair enough. But the thing about feasibility is that it is arguably the least subjective of the categories that are being evaluated. That is, as Cody said, anyone looking at a project could say, well, this website, they say they need money for this website, but they don't really say how they were going to use it. That's not about your topic area. That's not about the theories you chose. That's not even about the value of one or another publication in your record. That's about something very practical. And I don't know if it's been others' experiences, but my experience on the board, uh, maybe as Immaculate said, it's being sort of Canadian friendly, is I want people to get these funding, and I think the projects are good. We can't let it happen, and so in a way, as you're reviewing, as one of the reviewers, you're looking for places where you can kind of say, well, this I know absolutely I can justify lowering this score because it will be clear to everyone else on the committee. And you want to make sure you justify to other people on the committee that this is why you scored things lower. And that feasibility area is one where I noticed a lot of people were sort of bringing people down. And sure enough, I went back just this morning and looked at the stats I had from the committee I was on back in 2022. And absolutely, feasibility was generally the lowest average scores of any of the reviewers, which to me doesn't mean that we're being especially harsh on people. It means more that that is the area in which I think people are most feel that they're most able to maybe draw a project down and distinguish between, a project that's going to, score higher and one that's going to score lower. Budget has been discussed already. In terms of something you might consider is in terms of sort of introducing something different to your project is the possibility of a postdoc. Western has, and Kate or others, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Western has this great postdoc program where they pick up part of the cost, the faculty picks up part of the cost. So for relatively little money, I think it works out to about $18,000 a year in the budget. You could have a 2-year postdoc that's a really well-paid postdoc for an up-and-coming star, an international student, all kinds of people who you might want to have the opportunity to work with on the project. So, but the problem is to qualify for that program, you have to already have the money in hand to pony up for your part of it. And so you can always build that money. That's what I did this last time. Build that money into your SSHRC application and have it ready to go. Again, always justifying why does it what value does having a postdoc add? Obviously, you'd have to justify that. The final thing I'll mention is the value of working with collaborators and co-applicants. Obviously, there are decisions to be made about if you know there's people you're going to want to work with, what makes a co-applicant, what makes a collaborator. One thing that's worth knowing is that adding collaborators, people who have something to contribute to the project but aren't necessarily going to be paid out of the project, or the research is going to be paid out of the project, but have an interest in what you're doing and have something to contribute. Collaborators are quite easy to add, actually. That said, if we're working with international collaborators or community collaborators, I strongly recommend you get that done as soon as possible. Get them to sign on as soon as possible, because of all the problems I had last year, that was the biggest one, is just getting my international collaborators signed on, because the system is really terrible. And those of us familiar with the system already are able to navigate it. For new people, it's very difficult. Another reason for involving collaborators, which may sound kind of, I don't know, will tell you something maybe about my own time management skills, is that having collaborators involved means that you have to get your act together and have something to circulate to them as soon as possible, quite early in the process. And for me, I found last year that was really useful, because I had set myself an early deadline saying, okay, if I want to involve these people, I have to get them something by the middle of August, so that they know if they want to participate or not. The other thing you get in involving collaborators in that way is they become invested readers and evaluators themselves of your proposal, and will bring all kinds of, I found their feedback on the proposal so helpful in refining it. They are well able to figure out, oh, here is something you haven't mentioned, maybe you didn't know, but that I could contribute to this project, which you can, of course, incorporate. And of course, as collaborators, as invested readers, what I mean by that is that they're not just going to read and say, hey, this sounds great, which again, we friendly Canadians will sometimes do. Their names are going to be attached to this. And so they have real reason to read it critically and thoughtfully and make all kinds of practical suggestions. That's it from me. Thanks.
Thank you very much for those insightful comments, Andrew, as well. So what we're going to do now is for the next, it's about 2 o'clock right now. For the next 7 minutes, we are going to open up the floor for questions and comments. Actually, not 17 minutes. For the next 11 minutes, we're going to do that. And then I'm going to take about 2 minutes to wrap up this particular session. Any questions? Yes, Elizabeth.
Hi, thanks. That was a really great presentation, everybody. I'm really glad you organized this because I have had an Insight grant